Hey everybody, a little tea time with Mr. Gould. One of my favorite mugs. A shout out to my old high school where I got my first job, the first school to take a chance on this weird thing that became me as a teacher. Falston High School, Falston, Maryland. Check them out. Actually, they got a really active YouTube page. They got a really active Instagram. My friend Carrie down there does a lot for them. They do really cool stuff. Falston High School. All right, let's check this out. Today we're going to dive into the Enlightenment. That reminds me to remind you that as we review on the Enlightenment, try to always have a global review book out if you can. All right, I'm going to be looking on like page 52 of this thing. And I'm going to read a couple of sections to you, but I'm also going to just have a quick discussion on the Enlightenment. So get your book, get ready, we'll get going. All right. As long as we're all back, let's talk a little bit about the Enlightenment. This is a review. You've already learned things about the Enlightenment. It's important that you recognize the brilliance that you already have up there in your brain. The key to the Enlightenment: 3 branches of government. All right, Voltaire. All right, he used to tear it up pretty well. And then the last one that you really need to focus on is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Great French name, although he was Swiss. Great French name. So there were lots of other Enlightenment thinkers. Don't think that these 4 are the most important to every part of the Enlightenment, but they are the most important to what we're going to discuss today. So you got to remember there were other Enlightenment thinkers. I always love, by the way, I love this book. It's about Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power, by John Meacham. It's a great book. Great book. Yes. Is it lengthy? Yes. Is it wonderful? Yes. Well written, well received. Good book. Other Enlightenment thinkers. So Thomas Jefferson, one of our own here in the United States. Ben Franklin, often seen as an Enlightenment thinker. George Washington is really an Enlightenment thinker, but he doesn't really usually get the accolades that he deserves. I did a lot of things, especially when it came to horticulture, and a lot of agricultural advancements were done by George Washington on his estate. Okay, so let's look at Enlightenment thinkers. Oh, really quick. Mary Wollstonecraft. Not really concentrating in a review book. Can't be understated. That young lady, fantastic Enlightenment thinker, particularly at that time, being a woman during the Enlightenment, you weren't really expected to be a free thinker. Mary Wollstonecraft. She broke down walls. So, let's go to the review book. Now, I'm going to be looking on page 52. I'm going to read a little something to you. I want you just to think about it. We're going to discuss it. Really, I'm going to discuss it. And hopefully you're having some of these discussions at home. Feel free to just speak out loud in the room. If, somebody thinks you're crazy, maybe you are a little crazy. A lot of people thought Enlightenment thinkers were crazy. Mrs. Gould calls me crazy all the time. It's totally fine. So the Enlightenment. Now, this all occurred during the scientific revolution. So there were a lot of advancements going on in science, and a lot of Enlightenment thinkers would be considered scientists today. So let's look at our leading thinkers of the Enlightenment. John Locke, an English thinker of the late 1600s, believed that all people possess natural rights. These rights, he said, included the rights to life, liberty, property. In the 2 treatises on government, Locke stated that people form governments to protect their rights. If a government does not protect these rights, people have the right to overthrow it. Locke's ideas inspired the American colonists to rebel against Great Britain in 1776. That's the year of the Declaration of Independence. That is a question that is often used as a moment in which we determine whether or not students really know important dates. Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776. Now, another Enlightenment thinker, Montesquieu. Now, Montesquieu, remember, 3 syllables, 3 branches of government. Montesquieu's the guy who was like, I don't think there should be too much power held in just one office. And as they started to create this idea of a Congress, that's the legislative branch, so they start thinking about the president or whatever they were going to call it. They created the word president in the United States. So when they start thinking about that, how much should the executive branch have, like the president or prime minister, or whatever the head of government's going to be in the executive branch, whatever they're going to title it. All right, and then a judiciary, a judicial branch, the judges, the Supreme Court in the United States. All right, so Montesquieu, 3 branches. In the 1700s, French philosophe, okay, Baron de Montesquieu. He had a really long name. I'm not going to give it all to you, but Baron de Montesquieu is the shortened version of it. All right, wrote in On the Spirit of the Laws that the powers of the government should be separated into 3 branches: legislative, judicial, executive. Montesquieu. This separation of powers would prevent tyranny by creating what is called a system of checks and balances. Each branch could keep the other 2 from gaining too much power. The U.S. Constitution, written in 1790, reflects Montesquieu's ideas. All right, so Montesquieu, 3 branches. The next guy, Voltaire. Voltaire, he dealt a lot with satire. All right, satire is a wonderful form of discussion. It's a lot like sarcasm to some extent. So a lot of you are all very well versed in satire, whether you know it or not. Voltaire was a French thinker in the 1700s who believed in free speech. He used his sharp wit to criticize the French government and the Catholic Church for their failure to permit religious toleration and intellectual freedom. So religious toleration is the real key there with Voltaire. All right, Voltaire wanted to tear up old institutions. Voltaire, tear up, get it? Tear up old institutions and allow for more freedom of thought and freedom of religious persecution. He did not understand why someone couldn't freely choose their religion. We're going to get into that in just a second. Let's move on to Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, one of my favorite names to say. Go ahead and say it. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Another French philosopher of the 1700s put forth his ideas on government and society in a book called The Social Contract. He wrote, "Man is born free, but everywhere he's in chains," meaning that people are naturally good, but are corrupt by the evils of society, such as the unequal distribution of property. He felt that in agreeing to form a government, people chose to give up their own interests for the common good. Rousseau believed in the general will, which was not necessarily the same as the will of the majority. Sometimes a small group of people may have a better sense of the common good. For a society to function smoothly, even those who disagree with the general will must obey. Let me read that. For a society to function smoothly, even those who disagree with the general will must obey. Both democracies and dictatorships have adopted Rousseau's ideas. So you'll notice it says democracies and dictatorships. Because in a democracy, you can have a small group that has a better understanding of the general will of society. All right, this will be part of the justification in the United States to have political parties. But dictatorships will take that as to say, me in my cohorts, me and my people here who are in charge, like an oligarchy, we can see things that you can't. We are better shepherds of society than the general will of the overall group. That in essence, the greater good of all people. Okay, so the impact of the Enlightenment can't be understated. To be honest with you, it's the world we live in today. So I'm just going to read this one little section to you, and then I'm just going to shoot out some ideas. The impact of the Enlightenment, the ideas proposed by Enlightenment thinkers had a great impact throughout Europe in the 1700s. I'm just reading from the top of page 53 if you've got your review book. Greater numbers of people began to question established beliefs and customs. Enlightenment beliefs affected leaders in the development of nations. So I want you to think about that. Enlightenment beliefs, this belief that you could question things. So it always brings me to to one of the ideals of the Enlightenment. I'm going to post a link to a couple of other things after this, but I want you to think of this, and I wrote it down because I always find it really profound. Judging people on who they are and not where they come from. For centuries, particularly in Europe, but also in other areas of the world, people were judged based on their family name. Like, I'm a Gould. All right, that's my last name. That's my family name. If you go to my little hometown of Cape Vincent, New York, you're going to find dozens and dozens of Goulds. We're all over the place. But that doesn't mean that I am the same as any of them or they're the same as any of me. Do we sometimes judge people within their nuclear family unit? Sometimes. Sometimes siblings are similar. If you were to meet my brother, you would hear the same cadence in his voice. We sound a bit alike. But if you start to look around and you start to realize the differences in people. Now, in Europe at this time, family names were carried for centuries. So if you were a Bourbon in France, all right, you were linked to King Louis the 14th, for instance, then forever you would be linked, and it would be the idea that, oh, you must be as great as Louis. Well, okay, I mean, I'm sure some of Louis's peers didn't think he was so great. All right, so when you start to think about that family lineage, like the Tudors in Britain, all right, Henry VIII, he was a Tudor, maybe not the best example of being a good person, beheaded a couple of wives. Elizabeth I, Tudor, most people see her as a great queen. So those family lineage, you don't just get something because that's your family's name. All right, now when you start thinking about it, if we could all be honest with each other, that was another Enlightenment principle. Although the truth might not be the greatest thing to share with you all the time. Honesty from the government. Don't mislead us. Don't lie to us. Don't increase propaganda. All right? Just tell us. Be transparent. You hear it in the news today all the time, particularly now. But you hear it in the news all the time. Transparency. What's happening? Be honest. Those principles are all Enlightenment principles. For centuries, people had been lied to, misled. Wars had been fought for reasons that were so contrived, so made up, that people just went along with it because that person with that family name told me to do so. And you know what? I believe them. And why do you believe them? Because.